In the previous episode, we set up a project and we imported the Unity's first-person starter assets into our project to make a first-person controller. But the aim of the game is to find resources, and to do that, we need some tools. So therefore today we're going to add an axe to our player. We are going to go to the Unity asset store where you can find this basic tools asset pack, which contains an axe and a pickaxe, which is what we will need for this project. This asset pack also contains other tools which you can then use to expand your project later on yourself. So go ahead and import these assets into your project. Now I've imported the asset pack into my project. I will leave it in the imported assets folder to keep things a bit organized. I will go into the folder and find the prefabs folder. And as you can see from the preview, and when I drag the tools into the scene, they are all pink. That is because the material is not converted to our render pipeline. To fix this, we need to convert them by going into the top menu bar and click Window, then hover over Rendering and click the Render Pipeline Converter. I will just tick all of these boxes and then click Scan. Here you can see the Material Shader Converter have found one imported asset, which I can see from the description is our imported asset pack. I will click Convert Assets and then Proceed. And after a short moment of waiting, your models should convert to have the proper material on them. You can both see this in the preview, and if I drag them into my scene, it might be blue for a moment like this, and then switch to the original material. Now that we have our models, the next thing we need is to attach the axe to our player. To do that, we're going to go into the player capsule parent object, and then in the player camera root, we are going to right click on it and create a new empty child. We're going to call this axe, and then underneath that empty game object, we're going to create a new empty game object. We're going to call that model, and then underneath the model game object, I'm going to drag my axe prefab into. The reason we're doing this instead of just dragging the axe prefab directly on the camera root is that we want to separate the visuals and the logic. So all of our logic, scripting, components like the animator, we're going to leave that on the parent axe game object. And then the model containing the axe prefab, that is only going to be the visual part of the game object. So for instance, if at some point we want to switch to another axe prefab, or we want to switch to another tool, then the axe will contain all the logic, and we can simply just switch out the visuals without needing to change any scripting or anything like that. So now that we have our axe, I'm just going to reset the transform of it. And now we need to place it properly. I'm going to expand my game window a bit so I can see what's going on here. I'm going to take my axe, drag a bit forward, drag a bit down, maybe slightly more forward, a bit to the right, rotate it a bit, just play around with it until you find a good placement for you. I think I'm going to move it a bit more to the right, lower my game view to see how that looks, and now I can hit play on my game and I can walk around with my axe. So now that we have an axe that's actually moving with our player, the next thing we need to do is to add some functionality to it. What we would like to add to a game is that when we click the left mouse button, it makes a swing animation. So to do that, we're going to go to the parent root, so our axe game object, and in the inspector, click add component. We're going to add an animator on it. You can see this takes in a property called a controller. An animator controller is basically this visual interface you see here on the screen, where you can add different animation clips and create transitions between them based on different parameters. So let's start off by creating an animator controller. In my assets folder, I'm going to create a new folder, which I'm going to call animation. And inside here, I will right click, go to create animation, create a new animator controller. I will call it axe anim controller, anim short for animation of course. And I will also right click and create a new animation clip. I will call this swing. Now if we go to our axe game object, we can take our axe anim controller and drag into this property window, then double click it to open it up. I will just take my animator window and dock it down here in the bottom right corner. And we will also need yet another animation window. So we will go to the window tab, go to animation, and then click animation. This will give us yet another window, which I will also dock in the bottom right corner. You can also take your newly created animation clip and drag into here. You can see when I drag it, it turns orange. That means this is the default state. So this is the animation that will be active when we start playing our game. Of course, the swing animation is not the first thing we would like to play. We would also like an animation just for when our axe is idle. So we will create yet another animation clip. I will just call this idle. We can drag that into here and we can right click on our idle animation, set as layer default state. Now I can see it turns orange and the idle will be the first state. Before we go more in depth with our animator controller, I would like to take a quick moment to look at our animation clips. So if we go to our animation window and select our axe parent, which has the animator controller on it, you can see we have the small drop down menu here containing idle and swing. So our two animations. You can also see here we have this timeline. Right now it is set to frames, which I will be working in. But if you instead would like to work in seconds, you can click these 3 dots right here, select seconds or frames, depending on your preference. And now I think it's a good time to start adding our first animation. Hey, what's going on? DevSpark from the future here. In the clip you're about to see in a moment, I am creating a swing animation, but I am in the idle animation clip. Of course, that is wrong on my part, so make sure to be in the swing animation and not work in the idle animation. So with the idle animation selected, I am going to click this red record button. You can see this line turns red as well. And basically to animate, we're going to take what is called keyframes, which is basically the position of our game object, and change that over time. So for instance, right now you can see the position, rotation and scale are all default to my axe here. But if I right click while recording, click add key, you can see we get 2 small stars here. This is the position and the rotation of our axe currently. Then I can move a bit forward, let's say 6 frames. I can take my axe here, move it a bit forward, move it a bit up, maybe a bit more forward, rotate it down a bit, maybe like this. Quick disclaimer, I'm terrible at creating animations. You can probably make a much better animation than I can. Now this is my new position, 6 frames into the animation. And to get a small preview of it, we can click play here. This is a bit quick. So we will change the sample size from 60 frames to, let's try something like 20 frames per second. This is a bit better. I think I would actually like it to go down a bit more. So I will go to frame 10 here, drag it a bit down, drag it a bit forward, maybe rotate it a bit more. Let's try that. That seems okay, even though it's still very, very janky. And then the last key I would like to add is basically to go back to the starting position. Now, right now, the starting position is pretty easy to remember, considering the position and rotation all are 0 and the scale is just 1. But maybe sometimes you will find yourself having some really weird coordinates here. Might be hard to remember. So what you can do in the transform component is to click these 3 dots and go to copy, and then just copy the world transform. Or if you just want to copy one property, then the position, rotation or scale, I will copy the whole of the transform. Then I will go from frame 10 to, let's say, frame 16, just to kind of keep the same pace. And now my transform is changed. So I can click the 3 dots once again, then go to paste and paste my copied world transform to get it to go back to the starting position. And you can see it's added the animation key by itself. So let's try to play that animation now. That is very, very janky, but we're just going to stay with that for now. Hello, once again, it's DevSpark from the future here. Disclaimer, the animation did not stay like that for now, since I just couldn't bear watching it. I find this to be a much better animation, even though it is still terrible work. I admit that. Right now, the movement of the axe mostly resembles an old lady's rocking chair, but this is the animation that I'm going to go with. So just in case you wanted to see my positions for some reason, I believe you can create a better one yourself. Then the first frame is on frame 0 and it's just the default position, rotation, all 0s. Then we go to frame 6, where these are the values you can copy if you want. And then on frame 12, we just go back to the original position. So just in case you wanted my positions, there you go. So now that we've created our idle and our swing animation, the last thing we need to do is make these transition between each other and communicate with our game through code. So to transition from one animation to another, we're going to right click, click make transition, and then we get this arrow here we can drag into the swing animation. And of course we also need to go back from the swing animation to the idle, so we're going to create another transition here. And then you can click these transitions where you can set conditions of when to switch from one animation to another. To do that, we're going to need something which is called parameters. You can see we have a small parameter tab here, and we can click this plus sign to add new parameters. We can use a float, int, bool or trigger, and for this we will add a trigger. We will call this trigger swing, and then in the inspector window for the transition from idle to swing, we will click this plus sign, and you can see it takes our only parameter right now, which is just swing. And we will also like for our idle to swing transition to happen instantly when we click the mouse button. Therefore, we will untick this box called has exit time. We will expand our settings, and the transition duration we will change from 0.25 to 0. Now that is set up, we need to communicate with our Animator Controller through code. And since we are using our imported first-person asset controller, we're going to do this a bit differently than you might normally would. So in our imported assets and our starter assets, we have this folder called input system. Here you can see our input action map. We have the action map for the player with the actions we've already covered: move, look, jump, and sprint. We will simply go ahead and add another action by clicking the plus sign. We will call this action swing, and then we can expand our swing, select our binding, and then click path and go to mouse. and set it to the left button. Remember to click Save Asset. And now that is done, we can open up our starter asset script. Before we move on, I've got a challenge for you. Try adding the axe swing input yourself. If you look at the script, you'll notice there's already a pretty clear pattern for movement and looking around, jumping and sprinting. For instance, we have our variables here. And then down here, we need two methods, one in this on section and one in this input section. To add swinging, you can simply copy the existing code for one of these actions and replace the name with swing where appropriate. I recommend giving it a try on your own before watching the solution, and it's a great way to get comfortable with reading and extending existing code. And in our starter assets input script, you can see here we have the actions as well, move and look, which are vector 2s as they are directional values. And then we have our jump and sprint, which is just bools as they are click or press inputs. Of course, our swing will be a click input as well. So first off, we're going to create a public bool called swing. Then we have our on methods, which just checks if the values are pressed or clicked. And then we have our input methods, which basically just checks the inputs. So first off, in the input methods, we're going to create a new method called public void swing input, which will, just as the other methods, take in a bool new swing state. And we are going to set our swing bool to new swing state. Then in our on methods, we're going to create a new method, public void on swing, which takes in an input value, and then sets our swing input to value is pressed. Now we can save this script, and then back in our assets folder, we can create a new folder for our own scripts. We are going to create a new model behavior script called swing. I'm just going to delete the start and update methods. First off, we need a reference to our starter assets input. So I will create a private starter assets input. I will name it starter assets inputs. I will also need my animator. So I will type private animator. And then in the await method, we will need to get these components by typing animator equal get component animator, and then starter asset inputs equals get component in parent, as our starter asset inputs is on our player parent. Starter asset inputs, then parentheses and semicolon. And then inside the update method, we are going to check if we have the starter asset inputs and that we use the swing functionality. So if starter asset inputs is not equal to null and starter asset inputs dot swing, then we want to set our trigger for the animator by typing animator dot set trigger. We need the name here, which is swing. Remember to spell it exactly like you spelled it inside the Animator controller. And we also need to stop swinging once we stop clicking. So we also need to set our starter asset inputs dot swing input to false. Now we can save this script. Now all we need to do is go to our axe parent object and add our swing script. And now when we click play, we can still move around with the axe like before. And when we click our left mouse button, we swing the axe. So now we have an axe which we can swing by pressing the left mouse button. The next step is to add a tree, which we can then chop down. And that will be the topic for the next video. Until then, thank you for watching, like and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next one.